Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we try to balance that. So Auckland or New Zealand's not going to be a place that we come back every year, but it's a similar model to the U.S., Canada, and Australia as far as we have pay-per-view business there, both residential and commercial. And we've seen, especially after the last event we had in Auckland, like the spike in not only residential buys, but just commercial interest in the bar business and everything like that grow, similar to what we saw after 193 in Australia. Like that, the course and direction of our business in Australia has completely changed since bringing that event there. It's pretty incredible. And now we finally have Western Australia over the line. So the hope is that we're going to be in Perth in the near future. So when any of these markets that have that transactional element, it's good to get in there. And we actually have a TV renewal coming up with Sky in New Zealand and go back and show them that we're committed to the market and we're not going anywhere. And it just aligned perfectly too with obviously Hunt being available and going back and being able to fight there. He wasn't there on the last card, being a Kiwi. So it was a perfect storm for us in the right time. And anytime we can go back to a market like that, especially after the success we had last time, and I know there was clamoring for it. And then you have, forget about just like the financial and the commercial side of the business. Think about like the talent that's emerged too, with like Robbie Whittaker, Jake Matthews, and some of the younger guys coming up from Australia and New Zealand. Dan Hooker, I think, will be fighting on the card. Not necessarily young talent, but Mr. Kelly as well, right, in a pretty big fight. So, it's just, you make these investments and bringing these big events there, and it just kind of completely changes the nature of your business in these markets, all the way down from the talent, to your revenue prospects. So that's kind of where we are in New Zealand as well. I think of it as the equivalent as the 10 a.m. Pacific games for NFL, right? And if you're a fan, you're still going out to the bar and you're going to spend the day there. And that's why I think our pubs business, our commercial business is so strong in Australia. But it's become the Sunday morning/afternoon program. Because a lot of their other product is on Saturdays and Saturday nights, so it actually worked out well. And I think it actually gives us better flexibility when you compare it to Europe, where it's obviously on in the middle of the night. It's very difficult for us to bring, pay-per-views or our highest caliber cards there, because you're doing it in the middle of the night there. We did Manchester with Biston last year, but that's an irregularity. That's not the rule, right? Whereas in Australia, like, it's very easy for us to bring pay-per-views because you can do them Sunday night there and it's still Saturday night prime time here. There's no conflict. It doesn't matter where the feed's coming from as long as it's Saturday night in our time slot. So, even when we think about Perth next year, beginning of the year, should that be a pay-per-view? Like, that's on the table. Whereas in some of these other markets, like even Asia, it's more difficult because it's earlier. Australia's a little later, right? Where it's kind of like a late morning, afternoon. Asia's kind of early morning, it's a little tougher, but Australia's perfect for us as far as any of these international markets. You could argue that's even easier than a Brazil. When the Brazil cards, you've been down there when they've gone to 3 or 4 in the morning local time. It's not easy, but at least with Australia, it's probably the best outside of the US. It is aligned now. It was separate. I think that was a few things. Obviously we had changes and everything going on, but I think that at the time it kind of made sense because Australia's a pay-per-view business. Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, very similar businesses from a pay-per-view, obviously English-speaking Commonwealth countries, so like it's very similar mentality. So it kind of made some sense, but the travel didn't necessarily make sense. But I think what we're doing now is aligning it as kind of Asia-Pacific as a whole. So we don't think about it, at least I don't think about it as, oh, we're doing 3 events in Asia and 2 events in Australia, New Zealand. I'm thinking, hey, we're doing 5 events in the Asia-Pacific region this year, right? No different than the 5 events in kind of the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. And I think what you're going to see is that flow where we'll still be heavy kind of Aussie and Kiwi fighters on those cards, but you'll see a lot more Asian talent sprinkled through as well, and vice versa. I think someone like Robbie Whittaker, I guess, has been clamoring to fight in Asia and wants to fight in Singapore. That's not going to happen on this card, but he's probably going to be there as a guest fighter and whatnot and build his profile. So I think you're going to see a lot more cross-pollination in that side of the world, given that they are, and the funny thing is that if you look at Western Australia, Perth is closer to Singapore than Singapore is to Tokyo, Seoul, or Shanghai, right? I think people just think of it as like one big region. It's Asia. Like it's really not, right? I think Perth to Singapore is like a 4-hour flight. Singapore to Tokyo, Shanghai, or Seoul is like a 7 or 8 hour flight, right? So you start thinking about things that way, it kind of changes the dynamic a little bit. So yeah, it's Australia, New Zealand, is just on fire for us since 193, which is great. And now we're kind of focusing our attention, north in that region as well as we continue to expand in Asia.